moving on to the next speaker, as we said earlier, the next CB, Clare Blencowe, who is director of the Association of Local Environmental Record Centres, LERC, and manager of Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, who is going to talk on local environmental record centres in changing times. Thank you, Clare.
Great, thanks. Right, let me get my presentation up. Slideshow from the beginning. Can you see that, Neil?
Yes, that's it. That's perfect.
Great. Okay, well, it's a joy to join you all to talk about local environmental record centres in changing times, as well as the NBN at 20. I sort of felt slightly underqualified looking back on what's been going on with record centres over these years, as I've only worked in record centres for a mere 5 years. But even in that time, I've seen a lot of changes. We heard at our ALEC conference just a few weeks ago about how drone surveys are becoming a sort of increasingly widespread component of the range of services that record centres provide. And this image comes from Northamptonshire Biodiversity Record Centre, and it's of their drone team out on a site survey. And I think it's a really great illustration of the sort of work that local record centres can do, and the sort of scale that local environmental record centres can help us reach in terms of the environmental evidence base. And I think that the talk we've just heard really emphasises that nature habitats, they're dynamic, they want to be dynamic, and I think that presents real challenges in terms of how we monitor and understand what's going on at the site level. And this is a lovely illustration of drone survey work being used to look at what's going on a particular local nature reserve in Northamptonshire. So linking local, well, I thought as it's 20 years, it's always a good excuse to for a bit of nostalgia, a trip down memory lane. So I have illustrated this talk that I'm giving today with some photos from the Local Environmental Record Centre's family album. So you can enjoy those as I talk through various themes. I thought it's often interesting to look back as a kind of perspective on how much we've achieved and also where we're going now. So I'm going to focus on the future, but also with a tribute to where we've come from. So speaking of where we've come from, linking local environmental record centres was a project which sort of led to the formal establishment of the local environmental record centres network as we recognise it now. And I delved into the ALEC archives to discover that it started with a fax. That was how people got the news that they'd got the money to do this project. So the fact that I'm now talking to you across the internet is, I think, an indication there of how far we've come. And I won't kind of go into the detail of what was going on at that time. I picked this out from proceedings of the Sussex Biological Recorders Seminar in 1999, when our local recorders were given an update on what was going on. And I like this bit, that the preparation of a development plan is underpinned by a careful analysis of the needs of potential users. And I think there's a nice kind of link there with what's going on at the moment in terms of if we look to Scotland, our members in Scotland are very much engaged in that process of looking at who are potential users of the services that our network can provide. What do they need? And it's as relevant now as it was today. And I think services constantly need to evolve, and we need to constantly be mindful of who should be using the really valuable data sets that we curate. So I thought, thinking about record centres in changing times, it's almost a cliche now to reflect on how much technology has changed. But this photo that was supplied by Abigail Pedlow at the Bristol Environmental Record Centre is just a fabulous throwback, I think, to those early days of record centres. And I gather that Lawrence Way subsequently went on to great things at JNCC. And I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that the NBN trust and the LERC relationship was built around data exchange. It was built around that connection between the NBN gateway and Recorder 6 as a distributed network of data managers. And some things have changed. We've moved on from the NBN gateway. We've now got the NBN Atlas. But many local data managers are still working with Recorder 6, and that's adapting and developing. We're testing developments at the moment to export to Darwin Core. So things are constantly changing and adapting to our kind of new infrastructure. Record centres are also investing in technology. So as well as Recorder 6 that I've mentioned, where we're looking at sort of mapping out a future for managing the millions of records that people hold in that system. There's also the Online Records Administration System, ORCA, which has been developed in Wales, which has now been rolled out to 5 LERCs. So we're still investing in technology for managing this network of local data sets and keeping that moving forward. It's easy to focus, I think, on species records. That's what many of us kind of think about when we think about the NBN network and the NBN Atlas. But record centres are also dealing with a real proliferation of different types of data. So they're also working with green infrastructure data, habitat data, local sites data, and increasingly sort of bringing together different sources of data to produce derived information products, processing drone imagery, or kind of writing protocols in R for calculating biodiversity units to inform biodiversity net gain. There's a whole kind of impressive wealth of technological expertise in the LERC sector, which is being applied to making the best use of the data that we've got. How am I doing for time? All right. Services. Record centre services have always been responsive to changing policy context. And I think never more so than now, and the talk we've just had really highlights that. I think what the kind of emerging thinking around nature recovery networks and biodiversity net gain really highlight the importance of these data sets and how we can kind of use them and maintain them and make them ever more comprehensive and live to inform decision making at the local scale. Just briefly throw back to May 1999, I think it was, when May 1998, when English Nature had a position statement on record centres. I think it's fair to say that the relationships between the local environmental record centre network and statutory agencies has gone through periods of change in the last 20 years. And I think it's certainly a welcome thing for me that I'm seeing, as well as the kind of desire to integrate and make things accessible nationally to inform national decision making. There's an increasing sort of surge in focus on the local context as well, coming back, and kind of had a really positive meeting with the Chief Executive of Natural England the other week, Marianne Spain, and a couple of others from Natural England, talking about partnerships and local partnerships, and also recognition of the need for funding of the activities that support maintenance and development of local environmental evidence bases, and also engaging local people. Right. Moving on.
Yeah, just a couple of minutes.
Yeah. So people, there's just a vast wealth of experience in the LERC network, and there's a photo here with Sir John Burnett. So there you go, Charlie, if you're still here. That's I don't actually know which one he is. Is he the one in the centre at the front there with the brown tie? Maybe John can tell us later.
Yes, that's him.
Yeah. And just to say, I think ultimately we all want the same thing when we hit us collectively as the NBN network, we want environmental evidence to be good, and we want people to use it. And I think particularly in Straitened Times, it's been easy to get bogged down in differences of opinion about how to achieve that and lose sight perhaps of some of the practicalities and realities of the situation and the constraints that people are working within. But I think the LERC network and the NBN network is a fantastic network of people with skills and expertise, local knowledge, holding relationships with local networks of people. Another kind of real strength of the local environmental record centre network, I think, as a component of the NBN, is our focus on places. It's one of the privileges of working in a local environmental record centre that, as well as knowing those local networks of people, we know places, and that means we're uniquely placed to add value to local data sets, and I hope that we can continue to be resourced to do so and bring that to the kind of emerging data requirements in terms of local nature recovery strategies, those kind of things. And that sort of brings me to the end. Nikki Court sent me this slide from an NBN presentation from 1999, and I thought it's a good chance to look at how we're doing. Establish a computerized network of biological information. Well, tick, yes, we've done that to a large extent. Clearly in Scotland, members of the NBN are still engaged in exploring options for improving geographic coverage up there. Prepare publicly accessible overviews. Well, I think accessible is a really key word there. And I would highlight that the network of LERCs are making data accessible. That is happening. And as part of the NBN network, we are delivering against that vision. I recognise we hit a bit of a bump in the road with the switch from the NBN Gateway to the NBN Atlas. I think LERC Wales, with their Aderyn system and the way they work in partnership with Welsh Government, give us a really good model for how we could sort of move forward in relation to that aspiration. And I think the opportunities that a two-tier NBN Atlas could provide, that sort of signalled in the NBN strategy that's been out for consultation, that's a really exciting opportunity for, in terms of where we as a network could go next. Standards, I think we've come on a huge way, but with such a proliferation of different systems for capturing data and different types of data in terms of, eDNA now and sequencing and all of that, it's an ongoing job to get that right. And I think the FAIR data principles give us a really useful framework for tackling not just the accessibility question, but also interoperability and the data standards that underpin that. Interesting that in 1999 we were talking about, well, I wasn't around, but people were talking about social inclusion. It's, very much, I think, in everyone's minds at the moment, how we're not really doing well enough on that. How do we do better? And the last point was about facilitating conservation management. Well, I think that has happened, but I think as a sector, it's about so much more than that now. And the talk we've just had really highlights that it's not just about conservation. It's about our whole environment and how we facilitate nature's recovery in, if you want to use that terminology, in the wider landscape, and ensure that we're building nature into everything. We're building it into development, as well as just kind of that traditional conservation. And that's it from me. I think here's to the next 20 years.
Yes, here. Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. Just probably got a time just for a question or two. Rachel Tierney asks, through the ongoing work with SBIF and the SBIF review, we're exploring how we can adopt the Welsh model in Scotland. Watch this space. but hopefully we'll be starting an exploratory project next financial year. Great to hear Orca and Adern mentioned today, 2 brilliant systems to support greater data integration, shared services and increased resilience. Doesn't seem to be a question in that one, but if you have any comments on it, Claire.
Thanks, Eric. Sounds like we're on the same page.
How can interoperability between LRCs and national recording efforts, such as iRecord and various apps, be improved? So any improvements? That's from Peter Tomlin.
Well, I think the system's there in terms of, like, I can speak from our record centre perspective, which is that we signpost recorders to iRecord. It's a fantastic system for capturing data in one place, but it does kind of still rely on having local networks of verifiers to local and national networks of verifiers to review and make sure that that's usable data that's being captured. So I think looking at how we can continue to invest and support that network of volunteers nationally and locally really helps with kind of mobilizing data and data flow. And I think there's also kind of technical conversations to be had between BRC and users of data about interoperability between what's being exported and how that's being imported. And I guess that's a case of recognizing that people are trying to do different jobs with the data. So just purely streamlining it is, I think, challenging because everyone's got a different data model.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Can't see any more questions coming in. So thank you very much for that, Claire.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Good to see you.